Welcome to Tennessee's at-home learning series for literacy. Today's lesson is for all of our 7th graders out there, though anyone is welcome to tune in. This is the first lesson in this week's series. My name is Mrs. Alley, and I'm a 7th grade teacher for Tennessee schools. I'm so excited to be your teacher today. Welcome to my virtual classroom. If you didn't see our previous lesson, you can find it at www.tn.gov/education. You can still tune in to today's lesson if you haven't seen any of our others. This week, we will be spending time reading and analyzing a mysterious poem by Emily Dickinson. Before we get started, to participate fully in today's lesson, you're going to need a few things: paper, pencil, a surface to write on, and the student packet for ELA Grade 7, Lesson 11, which can be found on www.tn.gov/education. Let's get started. Today, we will be analyzing closely the words and phrases used by a poem speaker and look for clues in the poem that will help us figure out its mystery subject. This week's poem has no title. Our goal today is to read this poem and infer its subject by reading like a detective to uncover the clues in the words and phrases. As we explore this poem by Emily Dickinson, we will ask and answer questions. We will keep track of evidence from the text to support our ideas about each question. Finally, I will give you independent practice to get ready for our next lesson. Before we dive into the poem, let me ask, do you know about the poet Emily Dickinson? Yes, you may have read other poems by her in school, ones that begin, "Hope is the thing with feathers," or "Because I could not stop for death." Emily Dickinson was from Massachusetts and lived from 1830 to 1886. So she was born almost 200 years ago. She lived an isolated life, and most of her poems weren't even published until after she died. Her poems are quirky and were especially unusual for her day. She almost never gave them titles, so sometimes it's difficult to tell exactly what they're about until you read them very carefully. That's the case with the poem we're reading today. It's almost like a riddle. Okay, let's get started. Remember, our goal here is to figure out what this poem is about. As I read the poem, I'm going to underline words and phrases that might be clues. I like to see it lap the miles and lick the valleys up, and stop to feed itself at tanks, and then prodigious step. The mystery subject is doing a few things in this stanza that might be clues. I am going to underline lap the miles, lick the valleys up, and feed itself at tanks. Let's read it one more time. I like to see it lap the miles and lick the valleys up, and stop to feed itself at tanks, and then prodigious step. I'm not quite sure what these phrases mean yet, but I do know the subject is a thing, not a person, because the poem says, I like to see it and feed itself. What do you think it could be based on the first stanza? Could it be some sort of animal since it licks and feeds? One other note on this stanza. Do you know what the word prodigious means? It means enormous or huge. So although I'm not sure yet whether we're talking about an animal here, I know that if it is an animal, it's definitely not a small one. Let's continue reading. Remember, the last line in the previous stanza was, and then prodigious step. Around a pile of mountains and Supercilious pier, in shanties by the sides of roads, and then a quarry pair. The mystery subject is doing some more things in this stanza. It steps around a pile of mountains, and it peers or looks in shanties, which are small, run-down homes, and it is supercilious or arrogant, like it thinks it's better than everyone else, maybe even better than the mountains it's stepping around. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want someone peering in my windows superciliously. Then there's that last line in the stanza, and then a quarry pair. A quarry is an open pit from which we take out rocks for building, such as slate and limestone. To pare something is to cut it away. So to a quarry pair means to cut away rock from a quarry. Now, what do you think our mystery subject is? Well, now I think it can't be an animal either, because animals can't just step around mountains, and they don't usually look into people's homes or cut stone quarries. Let's continue reading. To fit its sides and crawl between, complaining all the while, in horrid hooting stanza, then chase itself downhill. What is the mystery subject doing in this stanza? Yes, it is trying to fit itself through a space. You are correct that it is complaining and making a terrible hooting sound. And it's chasing itself going downhill. What are you picturing as the mystery subject? I agree with you. It must be something large, noisy, and fast. Let's read the last stanza. And neigh like Boanerges, then punctual as star, stop docile and omnipotent, and its own stable door. There are quite a few words here that I'll define for you. Boanerges is a type of horse. The word punctual means to be on time, as you may know. Docile means easy to control. If you have a docile dog, it is very obedient and does what you tell it to do. The word omnipotent or omnipotent has two parts that can help us figure out its meaning. Omni is a Latin prefix that means all. You probably know the word omnivore from science, an animal that can eat many different plants or animals. In other words, these animals eat all things. What's the prefix that means all? Yes, omni. Potent means strong or very powerful. Can you put the parts together to define omnipotent? What is the meaning of omnipotent? You got it. Omnipotent means all powerful. I'm going to reread the last stanza now that we understand these words better. And nay, like Boanerges, then punctual as a star, stop docile and omnipotent at its own stable door. Now, I noticed that it has several horse-related words. Nay, Boanerges, stable. So the subject is like a horse, large, noisy, fast, and powerful. But what is also punctual when it stops? We need to keep thinking to figure out what this is. Students, please take out your paper and pencil so you can write down your responses to a few questions. I've got mine ready. I like to see it lap the miles and lick the valleys up and stop to feed itself at tanks and then prodigious step. Question number 1. Let's reread the first line. I like to see it lap the miles. What is the meaning of the word lap in this line? Write what you think it might mean and why you think that. To help answer this question, let's consider, when have you heard the word lap before? Yes, there is the lap that is part of our body we make when we sit on the floor with our legs crisscrossed. And there is the lap like when you run around a track one time. But the lap in this line is a verb. Lap the miles. What action does it make you think about? You are right. There is the lap that means drinking eagerly, like an animal drinking water with its tongue. There's also the lap that means to pass someone for one whole turn on a track. So what is the meaning of the word lap in this line? How do you know? What did you write? It's almost like some strange combination of drinking eagerly and running down a track, isn't it? Lap up makes you think of the drinking meaning, but miles makes you think of the running meaning. That's one of the great things about literature. Words often have more than one meaning, and they're both right. Take a moment now to edit or add to your answer to question 1. You'll be able to use these responses later to remember key points about the poem. Great job. Okay, question number 2. What does the line, feed itself at tanks, lead you to imagine about the creature the author is describing? Let's read that one more time. What does the line, feed itself at tanks, lead you to imagine about the creature the author is describing? Write your answer down. If you need some help, think about what you picture in your mind when you read this line. Did you picture something like this? What kind of food would come from a tank? Yes, gas and oil would come in a tank and they provide fuel for things to work. What does the line, feed itself at tanks, lead you to imagine about the thing the author is describing? Write your response. Great thinking, students. If the creature needs gas or oil to function, then it must be a machine of some sort. Combine this information with your understanding that the creature is traveling or moving very quickly. Now make a sketch in your notebook of what you think it looks like. Here are the first 3 stanzas. To answer question 3, please write the verbs you see, the words that show what the subject of the poem is doing. Identifying verbs will help us imagine the actions the author is describing. Again, for question 3, please write the verbs that you see in the poem. Did you write down these words? Lick, lap, step, peer, pair, crawl, complaining, and chase. Let's look at crawl and chase. What do they suggest about the machine? Write down your ideas. Correct. This machine has to crawl to fit in a small space, but it can move downhill quickly. How does the machine complain? Yes, it makes a loud hooting sound when it travels through these small spaces. Have you figured out what the mystery subject is yet? Take a moment to think and write down your thoughts. If you think you've got it, just hold on to your idea for a little longer in case some of our viewers need another question to be certain. Question 4. In the poem, Dickinson uses words to describe the natural environment. How does this setting help you determine the subject of the poem? Refer back to the poem to answer this question and record your response. Great job, students! The mysterious machine travels through nature, in valleys, around mountains, and down hills. Remember, too, that it hoots loudly. I think you have it now. What is Emily Dickinson writing about? Correct. She's writing about a train. A train travels quickly and over different landscapes. It's also quite large, noisy, and powerful. Look back at the sketch that you made in response to question 2. Does it look like a train? If not, what does it look like? How might you edit your sketch now that you know what the poem is about? For independent practice today, please write a paragraph in response to this question. How do words and phrases in the poem suggest the subject of the poem is a train? Take a moment to write down the question. How do words and phrases in the poem suggest the subject of the poem is a train? Now look at the poem again so that you can gather a few words and phrases that you want to write about. And remember, you can always access this lesson again at www.tn.gov/education. I enjoyed working on Emily Dickinson's poem and solving the mystery in the poem with you today. Thank you for inviting me into your home. I look forward to seeing you on the next lesson in Tennessee's At Home Learning series. Bye!